There's really no shortage of questions about the Nightmare on Elm Street movies, and there's no shortage of locations in the Los Angeles area. So today, we're going to take care of both. We're going to ask 10 questions about the Dream Killer while visiting 10 locations around the area that the films were shot at. And we're going to start at the film's most famous and iconic of spots. Question number 1. For the first location, we're at Nancy's and then Jesse's house. And, if you don't know, if you've seen the Bo Burnham's Inside special, that was actually filmed in the back house, right in the backyard. Yes, it was. And here we're going to ask the question, how exactly did Nancy get into Kristen's dream? In Dream Warriors, Nancy Thompson returns and is trying to help Kristen, who is currently being targeted by Freddy. While being attacked, Kristen reveals her ability to bring other people into her dreams. Considering that when we see Nancy here, we were just shown a shot of her waking up, it's pretty obvious that she's not actually awake. She's dreaming right here, and Kristen is able to pull her in. But wait a minute, earlier when she's talking to Neil, it's revealed that she's actually on Hypnosil, an experimental drug that suppresses dreams, and she's been on it for a while in order to fight Kroogs. So, if she's taking that drug, how is she dreaming here? Shouldn't her dreams be suppressed and Kristen wouldn't be able to bring her in? Well, there's a few ways to go here. The first of which is that keyword experimental. It's established that the drug is pretty new to the market and not yet approved by the FDA, so there's a pretty good chance that it's simply a matter of the drug not being as effective as they had hoped. It's also discussed as being a dream suppressant, not a dream eliminator. So there's the possibility that it just pushes the dreams down instead of completely getting rid of them. But there's still a sliver there for Kristen to get a hold on and activate, because that's how powerful that her abilities are. Now, considering that Hypnosil seems to be extremely effective in Freddy vs. Jason, it's also important to realize that about 20 years have passed in between the two movies, so there's been time for them to continue to modify and perfect, so that by that point, it may have been more complete in its suppression, enough to stop either Dream Masters or Krugers or whatever. Question number 2. For question number 2, we're at Glenn's house, which doesn't use any film trickery. It actually is right across the street from Nancy's house. And here we're going to ask the question, whatever happened to Dr. Sims? Horror movies do a pretty good job of making us hate some characters and then making sure that those characters get a sticky end. And sometimes those characters are doctors. Take the creepy-ass Dr. Foley from Cult of Chucky, or the uptight Dr. Block from Beyond, and they're usually a disbelieving authority figure that gets taken out by the very thing that they say does not exist, which is kind of telling about how the horror world views the medical community. Nightmare on Elm Street 3 gives us such a character with Dr. Elizabeth Sims, one of the other doctors at the Weston Hills Psychiatric Home, and is frequently butting heads with Dr. Gordon and Nancy. She's played by Priscilla Pointer, who, if you don't know, because I didn't, is the mother of Amy Irving, and has a tougher, harsher approach to taking care of the kids. The movie doesn't straight up play her like a villain, but it kinda does, and she won't listen to Dr. Gordon, helps to get him fired, and inadvertently puts the kids in danger by not agreeing to prescribe Hypnosil, and even having them sedated, setting them up for Freddy. So, with all of these dick moves in her repertoire, the movie makes sure to kill her off, right? Nope. The last we see of her, she's totally fine. So what happened to her? Well, in terms of the movies themselves, we don't really know. Her character never shows up again and is never even mentioned. We never get to see her get her glorious comeuppance, and as a matter of fact, as I stated in my previous questions video, I think that the deaths of the patients would ultimately be pinned on Nancy and her experimental tactics, and Gordon would possibly be tagged for the death of Nancy's dad, but it's not like Sims was involved with anything that would come back to blow up on her. Actually, the fact that it would appear that Nancy and Neil were off the deep end, it would come off as if she was right. Chances are that she would remain on staff at the hospital, possibly now with higher esteem, and stepping in to fill the void of Dr. Gordon, so the chances are that she actually benefited from the events of the film. So, This is a case of one of those notoriously jerky movie characters not only not getting bumped off, but actually coming out of the whole thing better than they were. Now, although she never showed back up in the movies, she did show up in a couple of other media forms. Apparently, one of the novels that continued the story stated that Freddy ultimately killed her, and in the Innovation comic book series from the early 90s, she's brought back and given a glorious death scene, dream image that Krueger conjured up. The series isn't exactly canon anyway, so it probably can't even be seen as an official fate of Sims unless you're really keen on seeing her getting it and not just moving on, and then, hey, yeah, that lady's dead then, and this comic is official. Question number 3. And for this question, we're here at Weston Hills, which is actually a building at UCLA. Believe it or not, you can see the where Philip fell from his death right up top there. But yeah, this is it, UCLA. And here, since I'm on a prestigious school grounds, I'm going to ask a very classy question of, did Freddy have boobs? Sometimes, when people talk about Dream Warriors, they'll mention that time that Freddy had jugs. But he didn't, did he? I mean, there's that whole bit where Joey is lured in by a blonde temptress and she removes her clothing and proceeds to straddle him in bed. At this point, she sprouts a demon tongue and shoots it out and wraps up Joey's arms and legs. And let's sidebar that for a minute. Does her tongue detach? Is it like the top part of it flies out and then it quickly regrows? Or does she have 4 tongues, which is an entirely different dream altogether, and one that I'm sure that Joey wished went on a little longer. But then Freddy appears, and it's implied that he had been the nurse the whole time. It's not shown though. I mean, the nurse like moves away and then suddenly Freddy is standing there. So I guess in the final edit, it's possible that the nurse was simply a dream construct and not Freddy in disguise. But originally, that was not the case, as it was intended to reveal the nurse's body with Freddy's face. They even did the makeup and shot the sequence, even if it has never been released, although photos exist showing the nightmare fuel that it was. So, what I want you to think about is the implications of this. Freddy had the kid lured in. Joey was at his mercy, and he could have taken him out at any point here, but the crew decided instead to get naked and make out with Joey first. There's been a bunch of times in which Freddy has taken on a disguise to lure in his prey. He's posed as hall monitors, Dick Cavett, hell, even another nurse. In none of these other instances did Freddy take the time to canoodle with any of the victims. But with Joey, I don't know, maybe he was just feeling it. Now, this is not the first time that we've seen FK get a little inappropriate with someone that he's been stalking, but this is the only time that he's gotten frisky with a male victim. Think about it. Fred took on the form of a hot lady, decided to pop out the jammers, and kiss Joey. Again, he did not need to do this. He wanted to do this, even though, let's face it, the Joester is a little older than he normally likes them. But this scene here proves that Freddy is open to experimentation. Question number 4. For this question, I bring you to John Marshall High School, the entrance of which can be seen several times in the film. And this question is, why does Kristen give her powers to Alice? Somewhere along the way, it's been established that Freddy is only able to enter the dreams of the Elm Street children. I'm not sure why he has that limitation, but in my previous video, I discussed how he was obligated to conform to the rules that his victims had created for him. So, likely, since the remaining Elm Street kids believed that he was only after them, this is what the reality became. Their beliefs informed his abilities. So, by the beginning of the 4th film, only Joey, Kincaid, and Kristen remain. He kills Kincaid and Joey, the latter using the same damn trick that he got him with in the previous film, because that's how stupid the Joey was. Kristen is the last Elm Street kid left. Freddy lets her know that he intends to use her dream abilities to pull in other kids and sucks in Alice. Now, Alice is not one of the original Elm Street kids, so apparently the only reason that Kroogs has access to her is through Kristen. But then Freddy tosses her into a fire and kills her. So there's several things questionable here. First of all, why would Freddy kill Kristen if she's his meal ticket? Without her, he can't get into other people's dreams. He's stranded and back to square one. Killing her off is the dumbest move he could make, so it's pretty careless of him to do so. Why would he even do that? Secondly, why would Kristen pass the powers knowing that they're the only thing keeping him trapped? She literally just saw that by using her abilities, he has access to other kids. So by just, dying, she could have prevented the entire rest of the 4th and 5th movies. And I have to say, as someone who's not necessarily a fan of those, I endorse that plan. Let's go in reverse order. First of all, I suppose Kristen gives Alice her power because she doesn't want Alice to die. She knows that it's her fault that she's exposed to Freddy in the first place, and in dying, she's leaving her there on her own, defenseless. Now, ultimately, if she had left it up to chance and instead tried some gamble to wake her up instead without passing the power on, Alice would still be safe and the power would be gone and Freddy would be trapped. But let's give her the benefit of the doubt. She's literally on fire, burning to death, and sees her friend in trouble. She was powerless to protect 2 of her other good friends, so she's willing to do whatever it takes to ensure that that doesn't happen again. She doesn't really think ahead to the fact that she's literally ensuring that her boyfriend and several other friends actually will die, but again, I point out, literally on fire. So she's not thinking of the far future because she, doesn't have one. She just sees her friend in front of her in need and does what she can in that moment to help. But what about Freddy? Why kill off the one person that gives you access to what you want? The best suggestion I have here is that, like I suggested earlier, Freddy is bound to the rules of the believers. At this point, Kristen is one of the few people that really know about him and believe in him. Perhaps he is partially aware of being bound to the rules that define him and actually knows that Kristen's belief that it's her power that restricts him is what's preventing him from just entering other people's dreams all willy-nilly. Maybe he knows that killing her off will take that restriction away, and that using that power to bring Alice over right before killing her was just twisting the knife, making her feel guilty and responsible for taking her out as just a last dig at her for making his afterlife kind of miserable. He's playing along, but he knows that with her dead, everywhere is Elm Street, and they're all his children now. So does this kind of justify Kristen's actions, since passing on her power also passes on portions of her personality, including apparently the part that holds the belief constraint that holds Freddy in place? She ultimately ends up helping out because she limits Krueger to using Alice for his victims. So her passing it on was actually a good thing in the end, but there's no way for her to know that. So the first point, yeah, that still stands. Question number 5.
And for this question, we are outside what they used for Tina's house in the first movie, which is actually, surprisingly, just a couple of blocks away from the beach. And here we are going to ask the question, in Nightmare 4, why didn't the wounds they received in the dreams appear on their bodies?
The way that Freddys Power works is pretty hard to peg down, but the first film shows us pretty strongly that what happens in the dream happens in reality. He slices your chest, slashes appear in the waking world. He hangs you in a dream, an actual physical rope will hang you. This is kind of enforced by the third film, although only sorta. Philip gets the vein strings and is pulled along, although it doesn't actually look like the veins actually show up in the real world, although Jennifer actually does get smashed into that TV, and that's probably a whole other question. Like, what did that look like? Was she just floating in front of the TV in reality? How did she get up there? How did the staff think that she got up there? Like she just ran up and jumped in? But I digress. So it's established that the damage you take in the dream world is reflected in reality. Yet, in part 4, that doesn't seem to be the case. Kincaid is stabbed in the chest, and yet we see him just clutching his chest, and no one mentions that he was stabbed or sliced, so it's assumed that in the real world he had a heart attack, like high school kids do. Later, Sheila is sucked dry by Freddy in class and turned into a collapsed skeleton thing. And did you know that they made Toy Newkirk go back and redub all of her own lines and asked her to sound more black? Anyway, in the real world, this doesn't happen to her. She doesn't go all California raisin. She just has a fatal asthma attack. This continues into the fifth film as Greta doesn't end up being disemboweled in real life, she just chokes to death. So why do the rules change? How does this happen? Well, it would appear that Freddy does have some sort of effect on reality and being able to warp it. He seems to have some sort of control over how things in the dreams affect the real world. This is apparent from the first film. With Rod's death, Freddy is able to get him hung in reality. Whether he physically controls the sheet roping him up, or this is the dream version and in reality Rob is doing the hanging himself, either way, Krueger has to have some sort of influence on how it goes down. I think he can actually control the level of how evident his handiwork is, depending upon how obvious he wants things to be. And sometimes he just wants to play. He's a bit inconsistent with it, like he makes Kincaid's death look like a heart attack, seemingly to cover up his involvement, but then he just straight up puts Joey inside of his waterbed. Like, how did anyone think he accomplished that? Like, he just got himself in there and sealed it up from the inside? What the hell? How did people not suspect foul play there? But based upon how evident that he wants his presence to be known, he can exert some sort of control. Kristen dies in a fire? Fine, have her body just burn up on the bed. It'll look like she fell asleep with a cigarette. He can even sort of suppress the effects, apparently, if you take a look at Dan's death in part 5. The pain of being turned into a human motorcycle doesn't wake him up, even though burning herself was enough to make Nancy wake up in part 1. I think it's possible that Freddy may not even have a solid control over this ability based upon how much power he has at that particular time. Like the whole Joey in the bed thing may not have been entirely intentional, as he was still fresh from resurrection, and covering up a drowning wasn't as easy as doing a chest stabbing misdirect. Question number 6.
And for this question, we're in front of what would be used for Kristen's house in part 4. And we're going to ask the question, how exactly did Freddy make Carlos and Spencer disappear? And, answer it quickly. Come on delay.
In most of the movies, Freddy just kills you in your dreams and you die in real life. That's it. But in Freddy's Dead, they throw in an additional wrinkle, and that's that he straight up erases his victims. When Maggie goes back to the shelter, she talks about Spencer, Carlos, and the John Doe, but her boss doesn't remember them and says that they were never there. Doc says that Freddy's tampering with reality, but can we talk about how OP that makes Freddy? His power is supposed to affect people's dreams, but for this whole thing to work, he's actually tampering with waking people's minds and altering their thoughts and memories. And it's not like he's targeted specific people, because it's not like Freddy would know who they were going to talk to. So it's basically that he was able to affect the memories of everyone that met the trio and delete them, which is a much bigger power set than we've seen from him before. Not to mention that he'd have to be able to physically alter reality, because he'd have to be erasing records and deleting photographs, or else the boss would be like, who are you even talking about? And Maggie could just pull out a file and be like, this guy. So now, not only is he able to alter the brains of large numbers of people in the waking world, but he's able to alter the very fabric of reality. I mean, if he can do that, why not do it more often, right? The only thing that makes sense here is that it's not actually something that Krueger is willingly choosing to do. He's never been that powerful before, and if he were suddenly that powerful now, I think that he'd be utilizing it a hell of a lot more than just deleting people's memories. So I think that his tampering with the walls of the dream realm have made it all very unstable and out of control. Doc says that it doesn't work on him because he can control his dreams, so it's clear that it is connected to the dream world aspect of things. So everything that he's doing has been messing with those walls, making the distinction between the two worlds thinner and having some unintended consequences, such as this. He didn't choose to delete the victims. It was just a side effect of the worlds coming down. Question number 7.
Here we are at the location of the diner where Alice worked, which was called the Crave Inn in the movie, but not in real life. And we're going to ask the question, in Freddy's Dead, how did they get into Spencer's dream without Alice or Kristens Power?
Question number 7.
And we're here at the location where they filmed the diner that Alice worked in, which was called the Crave Inn in the movie, but not in real life. And here we're going to ask the question, in Freddy's Dead, how did they get into Spencer's dream without Alice or Kristens Power?
So part of the point of Kristen in part 3 and 4, and then Alice in 4 and 5, is that they had a special dream power that allowed them to bring people into their dreams. It's treated as an unusual thing. Kristen first pulls Nancy into hers, and from that point on, they can use her ability to link up. Everyone has to be asleep at the same time for it to work, and without the power, they're on their own in the dream world. So then, why in part 6 are Tracy and John Doe just able to pop into Spencer's dream with ease? They're just there somehow with no explanation and no mention of how they got there. John had to knock himself out, and Tracy makes a point to say that she learned meditation from Doc, which is how they're able to make themselves sleep. But shouldn't they just be in their own dream worlds without either Kristen or Alice to bring them in? How did they get in there? Before I even get into that, let's go back a bit. In the very first movie, there's a point where Willy Wonka is supposed to be watching Nancy while she slept. A bit later, we see Glenn outside, and there's the insinuation that she's awake, and you're not sure if she's dreaming or what. When you know conclusively that she's asleep, we also see Gilbert Grape sleeping, and it could be suggested that he made his way into her dream, which again, shouldn't be possible. But I'm not entirely sure that this version of Crybaby is the actual dream self. This is just Nancy's dream construct of him and is no more real than anything else here. If Freddy killed this version, it would have no effect on the real Tom Hansen, only if he killed him in his own dream world. That being said, the next time that we see people appearing in other people's dreams is part 3, with Kristen using her power, and for the next 3 films, that's the status quo. You dream your own dream unless someone with that specific power pulls you in. But then, as noted, in part 6, people are just showing up together with no rationale. But again, as stated earlier, and in the previous video, Freddy's dream realms and abilities are contingent upon the beliefs of the victims. He's bound to the rules that are dreamed up for him. Since Kristen believes that she has the ability to cross over dream worlds and convinces the others around her that she alone can do this, that's what becomes the nature of the dream realm. Her beliefs, and then Alice's, shape the reality of that realm to create the rules. Later, by the time frame of part 6, either Alice has died or just stopped thinking and believing in the needs of her dream abilities, so the belief softened, and the rules no longer apply. Add to that the fact that Freddy's powers seem to have increased by the 6th film, he may have gained a little more control of what shapes him, and it's shown that he's trying to blend the dream world and reality, so it's likely that the walls between individuals has weakened, and these things combined have let people just enter into each other's dreams at will. Question number 7.
And here we are at the location where they filmed the diner that Alice worked in. It was called the Crave Inn in the movie. Have I said this before?
Question number 8.
And for this question, we're actually at the location where they used for the youth center in part 6. And we're going to ask the question, are the dream demons even real?
Everyone's favorite nightmare movie is part 6, Freddy's Dead: The Final Nightmare, which, as you know, was the absolute final Nightmare on Elm Street movie. This movie not only ended the threat of Freddy once and for all by killing him off completely permanently with no way for him to ever come back, but they also delved into his origins. And one of the things that they revealed was that Freddy got his powers from ancient dream demons that chose him as their emissary on Earth. But they were never shown before and never discussed, so did they even exist? Well, as everyone knows with horror films, every single detail of continuity is usually really thought out and pre-planned, so I'm sure that Wes Craven planned the presence of the Dream Demons all the way back to the first movie, so it seems silly that no one ever brings them up. It's simply not possible that they were written in this far into the series, so are they even real? Well, as we said in the previous question, Freddy's reality is shaped by the belief of others. At one point, Doc tells Maggie about them, as it just so happens that he has a picture of them up in his office. Later in the film, when Maggie enters Krueger's subconscious, she sees imagery of the demons and we witness them giving him his powers. Later, when Freddy confronts Doc, he randomly just starts talking about them with no prompting. It's something he's never done before. We finally see them explode out of Freddy in this dazzling effect. I'm just calling it an effect because it's certainly not special. So here's my take on it. The Dream Demons aren't a thing. They're not real. Same thing as the Dream Master and the whole good and bad dream door thing. The only reason they play a part is because Freddy's primary targets believe in them enough. When Doc tells Maggie about the Dream Demons early on, before she even has an awareness of Freddy, the concept buries in her head. She's the one that ties them to Krueger and his origin. It's her idea. When she enters his dream, she wills it into existence with her belief. This isn't a memory. This didn't happen. This is Maggie's version of how it went down. Her rationalization. And because she believes it, so does Freddy. She makes it into a part of his origin, and so it is. This bit with them at the end isn't an actual representation of them, but the remnants of Krueger that still exist, acting out the new version of reality believed into existence.
I like this theory because, let's face it, the Dream Demons are pretty stupid.
Question number 9.
And for this question, we are at the Rialto Theater in South Pasadena, which is where Alice went to go see the movies and was sucked into the screen. It's also where the opening of Scream 2 was filmed, although it is no longer a movie theater. And for this question, we are going to ask, in the remake, why did Freddy still appear in a boiler room?
In the Nightmare on Elm Street remake...
Well, what are you doing? No, don't click on the video. Don't click on the video. It'll be quick. I promise. I will be quick.
So, in the remake...
We good? Okay.
Freddy appears to his victims in the boiler room, much like his earlier incarnation. But why? In the original films, according to Part 2, Krueger worked at the power plant as a janitor and would craft his weapons and take his victims to the boiler room there to kill. It's a pretty iconic part of the original series. In the remake, Freddy works at an elementary school as a gardener and doesn't kill kids, just molests them, and does so in the school's basement, which we see and looks nothing like a boiler room. Yet, when he shows up to his victims in their dream, they still go to the location from the first series. Since there's no connection to a boiler room, why would Freddy manifest that? Well, first and foremost, we'll cover it from the film aspect, and that's familiarity. Even though it doesn't make sense from a story standpoint, there's a certain iconography that audiences expect from a Nightmare on Elm Street movie, and one aspect of that is the boiler room. The character is pretty much synonymous with the location, so it made sense for them to bring that aspect back, even if they didn't utilize it for the character's life pre-death. The movie already had plenty of little nods to the original to make you remember what movie that you were watching, so the boiler room dream just becomes another one of those. For an in-film reason, let's see. Freddy knows people are scared of dank, dark, spooky places, so a boiler room becomes a good location to unsettle them. Seems like it might be more appropriate for him to show them the basement that he did his creepiness in instead, but I guess he thought boiler room was spookier.
There, I put as much thought into that as the filmmakers put into the entirety of the remake.
Question number 10.
For our final question, we are right here in the alleyway that Freddy first appears in. He comes right around that corner there with the old outstretched arms. And here we are going to ask the question, is it souls or fear that powers him?
The third movie makes a pretty big addition to the lore of Krueger in establishing that when he kills someone, he basically collects their souls, which I'm told is what Nicolas Cage does as well. He just absorbs his characters and stores them in his chest like this. That bit is carried through into the fourth and fifth movies, with all of the souls being released at the ending of 4 and him only having access to his Part 5 victims and such. There's really not mention of the whole soul thing in Freddy's Dead, and of course it's a non-issue in New Nightmare, but then Freddy vs. Jason brings a new wrinkle. In that one, we're told that Freddy's power is contingent on fear and belief, a notion that I've discussed quite a bit over the course of these videos, and how that belief actually shapes his own being. But which is it? Does he get his strength from fear or from the souls of his victims? Well, considering how much I've used the entire belief structure to shape most of my answers here, that's clearly where I lean. But what's up with all the soul talk? Well, you're trying to drum up fear and perpetuate your own nightmare image. What greater way to strike terror into some victims than threatening them with the concept of their soul being trapped within you for eternity? I mean, the notion of being trapped in Robert Englund's chest is... well, I mean, that doesn't sound that bad, really. But I imagine it would probably be pretty scary to see it happen in real time. Plus, it appears that when you're in there, you match his skincare regimen. And I have a little more concern for my pores than that. But you may be asking, if the souls are just his own concoctions, then what's all this rushing out of him here? What's pulling him apart? What's pulling him towards his mom here? Again, I point to the notion of the dreamer's beliefs. Freddy's now inadvertently convinced them that he stores the souls of his victims inside of him. So again, their beliefs shape the dream reality. They're giving power to dream constructs in the shape of the victims. Much like Nancy took his power away in the first victim and it manifested as a glowing light, this is the manifestation that occurs here as dictated by the thoughts of the dreamers.
So there you have it, 10 questions that hopefully you liked the answer to, and 10 locations from all around Los Angeles that were featured in the series in one way or another. I am now running down the area that Freddy chased Tina. Yeah, I hope you enjoyed these questions. Hope you enjoyed the answers and the locations. If you have some other questions, please put them in the comments below. If you have some other answers for the questions I posed, put those down there too. Just leave whatever comment you want, actually. And if you enjoyed the video, please, of course, hit the like button. And if you like what you see on the channel, obviously hit subscribe. If you want to help the channel out, please go to my Patreon page at patreon.com/movietimelines, like these guys over here did, and help to fund the channel. I would appreciate that, but in the meantime, just keep on watching, because you never know where I'll show up, maybe even in your dreams.